Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the HR Leaders Podcast, the show where we explore the future of work with industry experts and HR executives from the world's leading global brands. Today, we have a special guest on the show. We're joined by Nishika de Rosairo. Probably got that wrong. Nishika, I apologize. Nishika is the CEO and founder of Experiential Insight. Welcome to the show. How are you?
Fantastic, Chris. Thank you for having me here.
How did I do the last name? Rosairo, was that right? Did I get it wrong?
Pretty right. We'll go with it.
We'll go with it. I love it. All right. You tell me after. Tell everyone a bit about yourself personally and your journey to where we are today.
Yeah, okay, awesome. Would love to. So I am a bit of a global mutt, was raised around the world, actually, 4 continents, currently living in San Francisco. My journey was right out of kind of B school, went into the human capital space, then into HR and executive coaching, have worked with wonderful companies like Deloitte, Salesforce, Cisco, Apple, several others, and really, really excited and thrilled to be doing what we are today. It was sort of a natural gap that I saw during my time. And, I just feel like it's so needed, and we're just blessed to kind of be in this space doing what we are doing and making an impact in individuals' lives and also in the lives of corporations as a whole in terms of their well-being and sort of societies as well. So very exciting stuff.
Why did you decide to leave the corporate world and start your own business? What inspired that?
Yeah, it's interesting. When I was a teenager, I just always felt that I was going to start my own business and I was going to do my own thing. I didn't really know what it was going to be in or what that meant really. And then my last gig was actually at Salesforce, and I realized pretty quickly that, I had worked with all these incredible people during my career, mentors, bosses, colleagues, etc. And I felt ready. I felt like I had the wings I needed to fly. And so I was sort of in that next chapter where I was like, okay, I'm going to go out and sort of give something new a shot. And so here I am. I mean, I always feel like that corporate landscape set me up for incredible success. Like I wouldn't be where I am without having learned from those people, having worked alongside them, seen what it takes to kind of build a next level company. So it was the right journey for me. But right now I'm on the right journey too. It's sort of transition periods in life and where you're meant to be going, I suppose.
Nice. I completely agree with you as well, because when I look back, I always sometimes I think, I should have left early and started the company. But now I realize that without that experience of working in the corporate world and all the different people and the roles that I had, that's what set me up for success in this business. So completely can relate to that. The title of this episode is Unlocking Human Potential in Organizations Through HyperQ. So I'm sure everyone's interested to know, what is HyperQ?
The $1 million question, right? So HyperQ is essentially a proprietary thought leadership framework we've developed internally. It's come from sort of 15 years of research in Fortune 500 companies and fast-growing companies in terms of what it really takes to unlock human potential. And so then we basically break up HyperQ into sort of 2 areas. One is left brain thinking, and the other area is right brain thinking. And if you think about how do you get humans to operate at their full potential, we believe that happens by unlocking HyperQ in individuals so that you can actually unleash all the potential we have. Even with our education system, what ends up happening is that, we're developed for left or right brain thinking and not really the culmination of both. And so to be able to kind of take individuals who are strong in their left genius and sort of add that creative piece or the inspiration piece and vice versa is incredibly powerful. So when we work with organizations, it's really about how do you make workforces more HyperQ and unlock human potential in individuals so that there are macro ripple effects throughout the company and also for society.
Mm-hmm. Wow, pretty interesting. I think I'm definitely more the creative side, and I do need some more work on the other side, so we can talk offline about that after. How does Experiential Insight serve sort of a gap in the market then? Because in your space, it's really crowded, let's be honest. So how do you separate yourselves from all the other organizations out there that offer, I would say, not say similar solutions, but you get what I mean?
Totally, yeah. I mean, there's a million solutions out there for everything, right? HR included. So I think the real sweet spot for us is a couple of things. So my background being in HR and human capital and stuff, I really understood the pain points that individuals and organizations go through because I saw them every day. We were solving for these things on a daily, quarterly, yearly basis. Right. So it's really about, what organizations are looking to solve in a way that's actually scalable, because I think companies really struggle with that. And then there's the whole piece on how do you meaningfully develop people? Because for the longest time ever, what we've done is we've put people in classrooms and assumed that that's the best way to train them. And, that's all we've kind of known. But the data tells you, and even, Harvard studies tell us that when people leave a classroom, literally a week later, they only retain 25% of what they learned in the classroom. And then another challenge is, organizations want to be able to go back to the business, especially if you're in HR, and say, here's how individuals have shifted the needle. Here's what happened coming out of an L&D program, right? So we kind of solve for all of those things, which is meaningfully developing people, shifting mindsets, creating greater retention, allowing them to take action on a weekly, regular basis, because it's bite-sized chunks that we're doing weekly with them for just an hour. We're catering to business needs, not just the individual's needs in the group coaching that we do. And then we're able to provide really strong metrics that say how much the individual moved the needle, and a whole bunch of other things that basically allow us to tell a good story around kind of the business understanding what happened when individuals went through a training program.
Could you give us some example of some of the exercises you do in those training programs that perhaps our listeners can take away and go and do tomorrow?
Yeah, so the first step is basically we get them to fill out an assessment. It's a really quick assessment called a get to know you assessment. It's 15 minutes. It's for the coach to get to know them in an individual setting, so that when they're part of the group, they can cater to Jane and to Ying and to Rajiv and whoever else it might be, right? But within the group setting. They arrive at their first coaching session. The coach already knows them. They've done a bunch of introductions in a private group that they belong to for the next 6 weeks with their coach. And then they arrive and the topic is already pre-designed. So let's say it's growth mindset for the 6 weeks. The first session might be creating real impact. And so the coach will run them through kind of a methodology that we have internally that's very much on the back end. And it's really around getting them to take their brain apart, if you will, and assemble it back together. And really what we're diving into with the individuals that are part of the group is how do you get them to understand where they are right now and where they need to get to and what that gap is. So they focus on working on the gap. And it's through this process called inquiry, which is all about reflection and introspection. It's then through a process called introspection. Not introspection, but shifting. And shifting is all about discussions and exercises that challenge the mind and get you to think about things in a different yet connected way. And so it's all of this sort of methodology that we use that allows the person to kind of pull their brain apart, if you will, and reassemble it back together, where they have these significant aha moments and these moments of like, wow, I didn't realize I'm doing this, or wow, Rajiv is doing this and why aren't I, right? And so it's this kind of cohort of a shared experience where they feel like they're not alone. They develop empathy. They can break functional and geographical silos in the process, etc. So the 6-step methodology in the hour is really what we deploy every single time, because then it provides a consistent experience regardless of how many coaches are working with the same organization. And it allows us to really tap into a methodology that's proven. It's our methodology around kind of how to take the mind apart and assemble it back together.
Just out of curiosity, what are some of the type of questions that you ask in the group?
So one of my favorite ones in inquiry is, on the topic of impact, a question that we could ask is, how impactful do you think you are right now in your current job? And most people have never been asked that. So they'll say something like, oh my God, like I don't know. And then we'll say,
and that's for the whole group, right? So you're asking that question and the whole group's listening, right?
Yeah. And they're all writing down their answer. And so they'll say, okay, I need to think about this. So we'll give them a minute or so to think about it. And then they'll come up with an answer. I feel like I'm a 5 out of 10. I'm a 6 out of 10. Someone might say I'm a 4 out of 10. And then we'll say, how impactful do you want to be in 2 years? And then usually people say a 9 or a 10, right? And that gap is really what we focus on throughout the whole session. So inquiry is all about kind of getting to that gap. And oftentimes people will say things like, no one's ever asked me that.
Definitely an interesting one. When you speak to these organizations, what's the main challenge that they're coming to you with? I'm sure there's some common themes that come up.
Totally. There are several common themes. I think the one we're seeing right now across the board is manager development, because I think companies are starting to realize that their managers are the most important kind of conduit in the middle in terms of information and impact flowing. Organizations will say we basically need to kind of up-level our managers in a way that actually create stickiness and momentum, even if they do amazing programs, so that we can create that reinforcement continuous piece for them to actually take things back into the workplace, right? So the manager piece is really big. We also see D&I around how do you create inclusive workplaces? How do you actually get everybody in the organization thinking through things like leading with inclusion, creating different spaces for safety. That's the big one that comes up, women in engineering. And then we also get a lot of change management requests around kind of, our business model is changing. We've just acquired a new company. We're fundamentally changing the way we do things, and we need a different mindset internally. How can you come in and do some of that stuff?
Wow, which is basically most people I speak to every day. I can certainly relate to what you're saying. All of those areas you just mentioned is what we're hearing from our clients as well when we're developing our workshops internally. So completely relate to that. How do you measure the success, right? Because one of the biggest challenges that we hear is actually measuring the success of the training programs and the L&D budget in general. How do you measure results of what that looks like?
And so we look at success from two standpoints. One is, in L&D, there's this whole component around readiness. Does the individual feel more self-aware, more confident, more ready to take action? The second piece is, did they take action? So on the readiness side, we do what we call impact assessments, and impact assessments basically asking the person on a self-reported standpoint how ready they feel once they've gone through a coaching hour in terms of where they were before and where they are now, and how much more equipped they feel to take action. So that's an important measure, because if they don't feel equipped to take action, they can't take action. The second part is we do two things, actually. One is we can go back to the managers and we can say, 6 weeks later or whatever, what action has this person taken based on HyperQ? Because everything we design is always based on HyperQ. Based on these, success skills in HyperQ, what action have they taken? So we can assess that, which is great, because then it provides kind of the piece around, well, they felt ready. That's awesome. Did they do anything about it? And how are you supporting them as a manager? The third piece we do actually is around HyperQ proficiency. So we can measure proficiency before a coaching track as well as after a coaching track. And we can measure how much someone has shifted in terms of the success skills in HyperQ that have kind of moved the needle alongside the coaching track. So the organization might have picked growth mindset, embracing failure, global perspective. And then we can tell you how they're thinking about it from before to after on a proficiency scale.
How did you do that? I was expecting to go into too much detail, but what does that look like? How do you go about doing that?
Yeah, so it's basically an assessment. There's 12 statements that come under each success skill, and on a scale of 1 to 7, and there's a spectrum, they basically pick which is most aligned to their behaviors or their way of thinking. And then we take that and we have kind of a methodology on the back end where we assimilate all of that data, and we're able to kind of place them on that spectrum based on the success skill.
Nice. And that's your own proprietary assessment?
It is, correct. Developed. Okay.
What's next for you guys then? Because I know you're obviously now in the UK. You're building sort of a lot of clients over here. For you, what is 2020? What's the main focus for you in 2020?
Yeah, great question. So 2020 for us is about starting to host our own leadership conferences, right? So that's one of the things that we're going to start doing to bring thought leaders together into the space. Also, we're looking at sort of, how can we add to our coaching tracks in a way that adds value, right? Because the coaching tracks are live experiences, which are extremely powerful. But then the piece around how do we get individuals to develop even more after a coaching track, right? So what are the nuggets that we can pop in after? And then really it's about, scaling with organizations. We have a lot of requests where we've worked with organizations for the last year maybe, and we've worked with maybe 300-400 people in a BU business unit. And now, we're looking org-wide at 4,000 people managers.
How do you do that then? Because if you only have cohorts of 6, right? Is that correct? You never go over 6. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And what's the reason behind that? Just out of curiosity, only 6?
Yeah, so we did a lot of research into the right number of individuals where learning can be optimized. And actually, it turned out that the right number was 5 to 6 individuals. And this was some work we were doing with Harvard on the back end in terms of like, how does learning happen in the most meaningful way where people can contribute to each other and actually grow together. And so that's why we went with the number 6, actually.
How do you plan on scaling that? Is it yourself that does the training? How many coaches do you have?
We have a bench of over 100 coaches right now. And I mean, we're constantly recruiting.
All over the world.
All over the world, literally from Singapore to Honduras to New Zealand to Amsterdam and Portugal, all over. And we're recruiting about 15 coaches a month, actually. So we're growing really rapidly.
Wow, that is a lot. and do you take them through your own personal training program for them to qualify them on your own on HyperQ?
Yeah, well, basically what happens is of coaches who are out in the industry, we have a rigorous 3-step screening process. So only about 33% actually make it into Experiential Insight. And once they make it into Experiential Insight, then we have an internal certification program. And the certification is all about, how we do things at EI, what's our secret sauce, HyperQ, and a lot of kind of components on how we measure success, because our coaches are rated after every 1-hour session, just like an Uber driver is. And
that's cool.
Yeah. So we send these ratings back to our coaches, so they need to know how they're rated, right? So
yeah. Are you going to build some technology around this as well?
We have a platform, so you can download it on Android or Apple, and it's basically our delivery platform in terms of where we run our coaching tracks, where people interact between coaching tracks, and then we have a whole bunch of other things in there, like insight talks, which are mini like TED Talk type things with industry leaders, and then we have insight groups where people can join a group that's of interest to them, and they can co-share and co-create on topics, etc.
What's the biggest mistakes you see a company making? Because I'm sure most companies that you work with are already doing something similar internally, right? Or have tried. Where have they gone wrong? What are some tips for people that are listening of what not to do?
I think the biggest challenge that companies have is that they think that training is going to solve everything. And it's not. Like, the data tells us that training actually doesn't move the needle very much at all. So I think that where companies really need to get smart is to think about development in a different way. And this is not to say that they don't run great programs internally for training. I'm sure a lot of them do. And so even if you run the best training program, you've got to ask yourself, how does reinforcement happen after? How do you create stickiness and momentum after? And that's the real challenge, right? Where organizations are doing it wrong. Like they put someone into a 3-day or 5-day thing that might be amazing or not amazing, but the point is they call it a day, right?
You just go back to work after, and that's it. Yeah.
That's it. And the thing is, like, internally, HR organizations are not big enough, so they can't really do much, right? So how do you bring in a partner that can then create the stickiness, the reinforcement, the momentum that's ongoing, that actually adds to the fruits of your labor and builds on that, right? And that's where I think a lot of the value is. And this is where organizations in the past haven't quite done it right and still are figuring out how to do it right. And Chris, if you think about a company, you've got sort of your top 10% and your bottom 10%, and you've got 80% in the middle, and we don't spend enough time on that 80%, but it's the majority of your workforce, right? So I think that, being able to really kind of take that 80% and up level them is your secret sauce as a organization today.
Yeah, I completely agree. We spoke about that before the show, right? And I completely agree about that, because I look at any company I've ever worked in, the training's always either been aimed at the top or at the bottom with people coming in, and never in the middle, which is literally, as you said, 80% of your workforce. So when you put it that way, it sounds pretty crazy. And by the way, I was just reflecting on my own leadership training in all of the companies I've worked in, and it's always been a 1-day, course or a 3-day, and then you're back to work and that's it. There's no accountability. There was never any, follow up as well. And, whether you took that material and executed on it was, up to you really. As well. What do you think is going to happen to the companies that don't shift?
I think we're living in really interesting times. It's a little bit of do or die at the moment, because, we've got AI coming into play, automation, all these things that are really forcing us to become smarter as humans. And I think the role technology has always played is it's forced humans to become smarter. But now we're at this place where it's really, putting us to the test in terms of how smart can we be around excelling alongside these advanced forms of technology, right? So for companies who don't up-level their workforce, who don't make their workforce HyperQ, I think the risk is that they're not going to be able to survive. They're not going to have employees who basically can produce at the rate they want, or even produce quality, or even basic things at the rate they want, right? Because a lot of things are getting automated now for efficiencies, to eliminate errors, right? All of this stuff. And humans have an incredible opportunity to step up in a different way. So I really think companies who are getting ahead of it now is the time. And honestly, there was a really interesting article I had read, and it was an IBM skills study where they'd interviewed 5,000 leaders, of which half of them said that they did not have any strategy for how to address the skills gap. And that's frankly shocking, right? Because I think we're at this time where we have to get smarter in terms of how we do that. And internally, it's really hard to do that, Chris, without partners, because HR is never big enough to address all the needs of the company, right? So then you've got to think about like, who are the partners I can bring in that can deliver in a way that actually stays true to our core values as a company, and that is able to deliver as far as our business charter goes, right, alongside the goals. Another thing that I always see is that, companies have this big sort of growth trajectory, and then if you look at leadership potential, it's sort of like that. So you're really asking, how do I close that gap, and how do I actually grow my leaders in the same way that I want to grow the company? And that's what you're really saying.
There's a lot of coaches that listen to the show as well, and that always sort of message me before and after. What would you say to those that have maybe interested in learning more about HyperQ and working with you?
We would, if you're interested, please, on our website, we've got our application form. Please fill it out. Would love to hear from you. I mean, we have an incredible group of coaches. We see that a lot of our coaches end up leaving other projects that they're working on to come do more work with us. Then one of the things that we offer is a lifestyle around working from anywhere in the world, working with the top companies and incredible employees and managers and leaders in these top companies. And then, of course, the ability to kind of learn and grow as a coach, because sometimes you feel a little bit stunted because you're helping other people learn and grow, but you're not really, getting that same kind of juice, if you will, yourself. And so having a supportive community where you can grow and stretch together is really, really cool, is what a lot of our coaches tell us. So get in touch with us. We'd love to hear from you.
Very last thing as well, just sort of one parting piece of advice you give to everyone, what would that be? And then we'll say goodbye.
The one piece of advice I would say is that, I think the greatest opportunity we have in front of us is that technology is going to make our lives easier, and we're going to be able to do really cool work, like not mundane work, but really cool work. And so the advice I would say is, stay open to what that means, kind of keep pushing on your growth mindset, open up new possibilities, new doors, look for ways to kind of learn and to fail forward, right? And look for ways to kind of embrace what's coming. I don't think we should be scared as much as we should be hopeful and opportunistic in terms of what could actually happen for us in a positive light. And so I would say it's an exciting time, and it's really about equipping ourselves to be that much better. And so we're here to help. If you need our help, let us know.
Fantastic. And it is a very exciting time. There couldn't be a more exciting time to work in this space as well, which is why we work in it, you working it, and everyone listening right now. So I really appreciate you taking the time out to join us. And for everyone listening to the show, thanks for tuning in as always and taking time out of your busy day. Apart from that, it's a pleasure speaking with you, and I wish you all the best until we next speak, all right?
Yeah, well, thanks so much, Chris. This was wonderful. Really appreciate it.
No problem. See you later.